So I recently put together a poll asking you all what was your biggest hurdle in setting up a whole home solar system like I have here with battery storage. And by far, the number one reason that was stopping you all was it's too expensive. So in today's video, I want to address that. So is it expensive? Yeah, it is. My 30 kilowatt hour battery system here with 19 kilowatts of a solar array and the SolarArc 15K plus all the wiring, everything was about $35,000. So yes, it is a lot of money. And I didn't even pay for installation. I did the install myself, so it could be even more than that for you if you hire a professional. So here's how my system works in a nutshell. My solar array generates solar electricity from outside. It brings all that electricity via DC current into my SolarArc 15K inverter. My SolarArc 15K inverter sends that power to my home residential panel. And the difference in my system compared to most people's is this feeds my entire home residential panel that feeds loads to my entire house. I don't have a sub panel. This feeds everything. So I can use every single load and appliance inside my entire house. So also my system it flips the equation upside down compared to what people are used to. So most people have a backup solar system. Well, mainly it's for backup only. So they have a system with battery backup in case the grid goes down. Then they fire up their critical loads panel and they can power critical loads to their house. And then when the grid comes back on, they don't use their system. I flip that entire equation upside down. I don't want this system as my backup. I want this as my main system. So my home is being powered by solar and batteries 100% of the time. I do have a grid connection in here as well in case I need backup. So the grid's my backup in my system. And I'll have a link in the description of this video if you want to download a PDF diagram of my entire system, how it's wired, all the equipment I use down to the conduit size, wire size, everything. You can go to solarpdfdownload.com, or you can I'll leave a link in the description. Check it out in the description. You can click on that there. So do I think my system is financially worth it? Absolutely yes. Now, I didn't have $35,000 to spend in cash to buy this system outright. So what I did is I put $5,000 down, basically paid for $5,000 of the equipment myself, and then I financed $30,000 of that through a company called Lightstream Loans. Lightstream.com is the actual website. And I used them to fund it for $30,000 over a 10-year period. At the interest rate when I did it, which was about, a year and a half ago, that was at just below 8%, which was pretty good at the time. Now, rates are higher now, so you'll pay a little bit more in interest. Now, my monthly payment on my loan for this system is $356 a month. Now, I plan on paying it off in about half the time to save myself a boatload of interest. And if you do it this way, I recommend you do that as well. So I have a loan payment of $356 a month, but then we need to ask, how much am I actually saving in electricity now that I have my system in place? Now, my average, I'm saving about $180 a month in electricity, but I'm also saving about $100 a month in propane because I converted my water heater, my whole home heater, because that was on propane as well. Now I have a 2-ton mini split that powers most of my house, and then I have another mini split in the master bedroom. So I'm not using propane for heating anymore. And also I've got a propane stove, but I have induction cooktops now that basically are powered by on electricity, and we use that as the top burners. So we're using virtually no propane anymore because I'm producing all the power I need from the sun. Why should I pay for propane? So I really wanted to be all electric. So if you add up the money I'm saving, $180 a month for electricity, another $100 a month in propane, that's $280 a month, and my system is costing me a loan payment of $356 a month. So actually, if you net that out, I'm paying $80 a month to have this system. But I also have power whenever there's a storm and it knocks out the power grid, which here in Texas seems to be a lot more often now. So I've got that peace of mind. So I did pay an additional $4,400 to convert those appliances I mentioned over to electric instead of using propane. So if you take that $4,400 plus my $35,000 I spent on my system, my total system cost is $39,400. So if you take that figure and then divide that by what I'm saving per month in propane and electricity, which is $280 a month, that comes out to about a 12-year payback period. In other words, it's going to take 12 years for me to break even on this. And then after year 12, electricity's free, then I'm actually making money on this system. And keep in mind, that is without selling back to the grid. Now, I could sell back to the grid, and because my system's huge. I produce a lot more energy than I need when the sun is out, but I don't want to deal with the electric company and their special meters and their regulations and their meter charge for monthly for the extra net metering. I don't want to deal with any of that. I don't want to deal with their inspections. I just want to be left alone. So for me, the selling back isn't worth it. Now, that might be different for you. If you want to increase your payback period, absolutely sell back and you'll bring that payback period down. So with a 12-year payback period, would I do it again? For me, yeah, absolutely, because I think this system's going to last probably at least 15 years and probably more than that. But if that was the case, which that's not the final number this system's costing me, which I'll get into in a second. But even if that was it, I would still do this system over again in a heartbeat, because I believe electricity rates are going to go a lot higher from where they're at right now. And using that payback period, that's at today's electric rates. And I also think the grid's going to become more and more unstable. So now I'm going to have power regardless of what happens with the grid. And you can't put a price tag on that. So now let's take into account the solar tax credit you get, because I get a 30% tax credit on everything that I bought on my system, and including the appliances I bought. Those are a heat pump washer and dryer, a heat pump water heater, a heat pump AC and heater. Those are all considered energy efficient, and you get you get a tax credit on that in the realm of about 30% as of right now. So if I take that $39,400 and multiply that by 30%, that's $11,280 I can pull off the top. I can take off my system. So in reality, my system only cost me $27,580. Now, if you divide that $27,580 divided by what I'm saving per month, which is $280, now that's a little over an 8-year payback period. So you can see that solar credit brings down my payback period from 12 years all the way down to 8. Now the system's looking like an extremely no-brainer to put in. Now, what most people leave out when they're doing the math or running the numbers on whether a system makes sense for them, they don't consider inflation. And guys, you've got to consider inflation. We're going to see inflation rates, in my opinion, a lot higher than what we've seen the last 3 years, which has been insane since COVID, and seeing how much electricity rates are going up. In fact, how much the price of everything is going up these days. So we all know prices rise every year. The Federal Reserve, our central bank here in the US, actually targets a 2 to 3% inflation rate. But essentials like food, energy, gasoline, housing, shelter, that tends to run hotter than the 2 to 3% inflation rate that the Federal Reserve targets. And with our failing electric grid, with more electric vehicles being plugged in, which are a huge strain on the electric grid right now, and are going to continue to get worse as more and more people buy these things and as the government mandates them. And also you've got regulations that new housing in a lot of states all have to be electric. They can't have any propane or natural gas. We're going to see the electric grid continue to be strained, in my opinion, causing shortages or higher prices in electricity rates. So we need to take that into consideration when we're doing the math on whether our system makes sense. So I'm estimating about a 10% rate of inflation with energy for the foreseeable future. That's my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm going with as a base. So now let's get into a spreadsheet that I built and I used personally to see how much the rate of inflation can change my payback period on my system. So let's get into it.
So here's the spreadsheet I created to help figure out how much inflation plays a role in how much energy costs are and how that affects your overall payback period. So let's get into it. So I made this very simple. All you have to do is fill in these yellow highlighted boxes here. That's it. And the spreadsheet will do the rest. So the first box there is the estimate annual rate of inflation. So you're going to estimate that 3% is what is average. That's what the Federal Reserve targets. Now I believe that's going to be 10% for energy. But for now, let's just leave it at 0, just so you can see how most people do their break-even calculation. And then we'll get to see how much inflation plays a role on that. So the next box here is your current average monthly cost of electricity. So my current average monthly cost before I put in my system was $220 a month. But as I mentioned, I still have an electric charge because the meter fee alone is $23 a month. And then usually there's a storm, 1 or 2 storms during the month where I use a little bit of electricity. maybe about 15 bucks worth. So really, I probably spend about 40 bucks a month on my electric bill because of that. So out of my $220 a month average bill, really I'm saving $180, which is what I mentioned. So I'm going to put that $180 a month there. And then for my propane, I'm saving about $100 a month, or that's about what my propane used to cost me. Actually, it used to cost me about $110 a month, and I'm still using about $10 a month in propane because I still use my oven, which is propane, but that's it. Stovetop, like I mentioned, I have induction cooktops. So really my only bill for propane is that oven, and that's right about 10 bucks a month. So really I'm saving $100 a month on my propane bill. So now let's look at this first column here. How does this work? So electricity, year one, $180 a month. And what does that cost me yearly? $2,160. And because I don't have inflation in here, you can see it's $180 every single year. So the yearly cost is exactly the same going all the way down to year 20, which is where I stop. And same thing with natural gas or propane. I'm saving or was paying $100 a month. And you can see $100 a month is $1,200 a year. And that goes all the way down. Again, same thing down to year 20. It's the same cost in year 20 as it was in year one. We all know that's not going to be the case. But now let's see where our break even is. So now you have to fill in the last box, which right here is how much your system cost you. So my system cost me 35,000 plus the 4,400 I put into the converting my appliances over to electric. So 39,400. So I do have bullet points here that say include the cost of replacing your gas appliances, which I did, and then minus any solar tax credits you received via local or federal. And I'm not going to do any solar tax credits right now, just so you can see what the numbers look like without inflation, without the tax credit, which is probably how most people would try to figure out if their system makes sense. And you'll see how you can make a bad decision if you don't put in inflation and that solar tax credit. So here's how we use a spreadsheet. So my system cost me $39,400. So what I would do is scroll down here on this column that's kind of highlighted in kind of the orangish pan look here. And what this is that first $3,360 is year one total electric costs plus year one total propane costs. That's $3,360. And as you can see, that just doubles. It adds $3,360 to year two, and then to year three, and then to year four in perpetuity until all the way down to year 20 here. So this is basically what you're paying overall is what you paid in electric and propane included over the years here. So what you need to do is take the cost of your system, which is 39,400 for me. And when does this column reach 39,400? And it does right about, let's see, 39 right here, right at year 12. So that would be my break even. 12 years for my system to pay for itself. That's how much I would have saved in electricity and propane over 12 years. That's about where that break even is. So just shy of 12 years. Now that we know that, let's enter 3% inflation. Let's just see. So you enter 3% here, and then you'll see how the numbers change. So now your average monthly electric bill is going up by 3% annually, and your propane or natural gas bill is going up 3% annually. How does that change the numbers? So when do we get to 39,400 now on the column on the right? And it's really closer to right here, which is year 10. Just barely over year 10 is when our break even is. So we pulled off really 2 years just by adding 3% inflation. Now let's take in, how about what I think it's going to be 10% inflation. Now let's see how those numbers change. Now that 39,400 happens right about here. And that is year 8. So now we have an 8-year break even. Now, let's take into consideration the 30% solar tax credit. So the $39,400 there actually goes down to $27,580 if I get the whole 30%, which I should. Now it might take over a few years to get that back because you only can get credited for what you paid in federal income tax. So most people don't pay $12,000 in federal income tax a year. You may be in that tax bracket, so you might get it all in year one. If not, you'll have to just get the max or as much as you can in year one and then get the rest in year two or even year three, but you'll get that back. So now let's enter the $27,580, which is what my system cost me after the incentives or the 30% federal tax credit. Now, I don't get a local tax credit. You may if you're in California or New York. Some of those states like that have that, but I'm not going to use that because that could be different everywhere. But everybody gets that 30%. So if I do that, now let's find out where our break even is with 10% inflation and taking into consideration the solar tax credit. Now 27,580. Where's that at? Really, that's right in between year 6 and year 7. So, originally, without taking into consideration inflation or the federal tax credit, I was at 12 years for my break even. Now look where I'm at. So I am between here, year 6 and 7 is my break even. Look at the difference on that. And most people don't take that into consideration at all when, guys, you need to do that. So I will have this spreadsheet available for download for those of you who want to join my Patreon group. It is a monthly subscription, small monthly. It's like $6 a month, but you'll get access to these spreadsheets that I use. A lot of content that I don't put on YouTube, and in fact, what I do put on YouTube, I put it on my Patreon group first. So those of you who support me there can see that. But I've got a lot of other spreadsheets as well, and diagrams and things that will probably help you out. So if you're interested in downloading this, go ahead and go there. I'll leave a link in the description to that, or you can just go to Patreon, patreon.com/unplugged Texan, and you can find it there.
If you don't have the funds or the cash to be able to purchase your system up front, then financing is definitely, I think, a good option to consider. But you also have another option. You don't have to purchase your entire system up front. In fact, I didn't even do that. I only have 30 kilowatts of battery storage. I want to get up to 60 kilowatts, but it wasn't in my budget to do that. But the good thing about it is you can add more batteries over time. You can also add more solar panels over time. So you don't have to start with your entire solar array up front, though I would install the wiring for it up front, which isn't that much more expensive to just add the additional wiring when you do your initial solar array. I would definitely do that so you don't have to do that over again. But the one piece of the system that you do need to purchase up front is your inverter. So this, like for me, it's the Solarc 15K. It could be the EG4 18K PV, which is another solid inverter. You want to purchase those up front because you'll need that piece. That is the heart of the system. It's the brains of the operation. You can add batteries, you can add solar panels, but you can't add inverting power. So you got to start with this thing. But other than that, you can start with one battery. You can start with 1,000 watts of solar panels just to get yourself going, and then scale up over time as your budget allows. So with our national debt here in the US approaching $34 trillion, and right now we're spending $2 trillion as a nation or government, $2 trillion more than we take in tax revenue. So what does that mean? That means inflation is most likely here to stay, or at least for the foreseeable future. There doesn't appear to be any will from either side of the aisle, either of our two political parties, that are serious about addressing our national debt. And why should they? I mean, they haven't seen any real effect. They still maintain their power positions. They're not getting booted out of office for high inflation. So for them, they don't see a need to change anything. In fact, a lot of people, including me, have thought we were going to see a lot higher inflation after 2008 when we had all the financial bank bailouts and the financial recession that we had. That was, I mean, that rocked our country for a while. And we printed a lot of money, a lot less than what we've done now. But we didn't see a huge effect on inflation at that time. So our government kind of thought with this scenario happening with COVID that they could just print as much as they wanted and there would be no repercussions. Well, as we've seen, prices are now skyrocketing. That genie is out of the bottle. And that inflation genie, if you look over history, it's really hard to put it back in the bottle once it's out. Now, back in 1980, it took 20% interest rates. The Federal Reserve rose interest rates to 20% in order to knock down inflation that was getting out of control back then. We're at around 5% interest rates right now. And look how messed up our housing market already is. Back in 1980, when we raised interest rates to 20%, our national debt was less than $1 trillion. It was about $980 billion. So the interest we were paying as a nation on the national debt wasn't that high. Today, we have a national debt of $34 trillion, or just shy of that. If we raise interest rates to 20%, guys, the interest alone on that national debt will bankrupt our nation. In fact, right now, our interest payments on our national debt just crossed $1 trillion. That's more than the entire national defense budget for the United States. So something's got to give. In my opinion, it's going to be more printing. The Federal Reserve has no choice but to add more money into the economy. to deflate the dollar or lower the value of the dollar in order to help pay down our debt. That just means we're all Americans, anybody who spends money buying groceries, buying gas, we're all going to pay that in the inflation tax and just pay more for those essential items. So me personally, I am a big fan of gold and silver to help yourself protect from inflation or what's coming down the road. But as we've seen, those markets, the precious metal markets, they can be manipulated. I mean, just do a Google search on how many people with JP Morgan have been convicted of manipulating or spoofing the precious metals market. So that can be manipulated. So you can't put all your eggs in that basket. So for me, what I was trying to do with my system was, okay, I can buy all of that energy for the next 15, 20 years up front installing my system. So now I am protected from inflation, from energy inflation. I own my own house, so I'm protected from that housing inflation that we've seen over the last few years and we might see into the future. And actually, even with gasoline, which is going to get tougher and tougher to pay for because it's going up in price, now I might get an electric car and I can produce my own energy from the sun to drive my car. So personally, in my opinion, I don't think this system is too expensive, because if you look at what's coming down the road and how much you're going to save over time with inflation, the cost of energy going up, having not backup power, but actual full-time power you can use all the time, where if the grid goes down, it doesn't matter. You can still power your house. So while the upfront cost might look expensive, in the long run, it is not for what you're going to get out of this. So hopefully I've answered that question for a lot of you who thought this system is too expensive to even try, because I think the alternative is going to be even more expensive if you don't do a system. But that's something you got to figure out on your own. That's it for now, everyone. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel for more content like this. We'll see you in the next video.